Hello, everybody. Thanks. Welcome. I'm pleased to welcome you all to this event celebrating the history of Loyola Marymount University and commemorating the 50th anniversary of the beginning of the formal affiliation between Loyola University and Marymount College, and the arrival of the Marymount students here on the Westchester campus. My name is Brian Traynor. I'm a professor in the philosophy department, and I'm also the director of the Academy of Catholic Thought and Imagination here at Loyola Marymount University. The Academy serves as a sort of hub for promoting scholarship and intellectual community that engages the rich and the diverse Catholic intellectual tradition here on campus. As such, the Academy lies at the center of our university's mission, indeed the mission of any university, to produce and to disseminate knowledge and to educate students. As director, I want to thank in a special way all the administrators, faculty, and staff who helped to make tonight's event happen. In particular, Catherine Brown, who's the director of Mission and Identity Programs with the Office of Mission and Ministry, and Emilu Reyes, the senior administrative coordinator at the Academy with me, without whom this excellent event would not have been possible. Tonight, the Academy is working with the Marymount Institute for Faith, Culture, and the Arts to bring you this event. Therefore, it's my honor and my pleasure to introduce Theresia de Vroom, Professor of English and Director of the Marymount Institute, as well as the Director of this year's Bellarmine Forum, which is a year-long series of events that the Bellarmine Forum, that the Bellarmine College holds each year, focusing on an issue that is interdisciplinary and of global import. It would be very difficult to overstate the esteem in which I hold Theresia and her colleagues at the Institute, especially her colleague Elias Wondemu. To my mind, their extraordinary work at the Institute, and with the Marymount Institute Press and the African Academic Press, represent some of the very best of LMU. Beautifully executed, exceptionally creative, intellectually rigorous, and engaged with the problems of our world. So, please join me in welcoming Professor de Vroom, who will introduce tonight's keynote speaker.
Thank you, Brian, for such a generous introduction. As one of my friends says, we do what we can. We're so happy to have this great gathering of all of you here today and to commemorate the 50th year anniversary of the affiliation of Loyola Marymount and Loyola University and Marymount College. I think when I was a young person, I thought that artists and thinkers and writers were these tortured people who lived alone and, thought things up and did all kinds of marvelous things. But as I got older, and the theme of this year's Bellarmine Forum is collaboration and creativity, we don't do anything alone if we're any good. We have universities and libraries and families. We make books together. They don't exist without a whole bunch of people making them together. We have plays and movies. We do all kinds of things that we do together, and nothing happens. If you're lucky, maybe a few things happen alone, but we won't talk about those. We're very happy about that. I think that also the thesis of the religious, the Sacred Heart of Mary is that all may have life and live it to the full. And I think that's really the inspiration for everything I do every single day, pretty much. And I'm with Dorothy Day, and given our complete, in my opinion, political and religious crises right now, the world will be saved by beauty. And what we're trying to do is make beautiful books. We have interns. We have an artist in residence who's trying to preserve the legacy of the R.S.H.Ms on campus. And this idea of somehow that we work together. So now I've got to go to my script. One second. I'm pleased to present Timothy Law Snyder, LMU's 16th president. President Snyder has had a profound commitment and appreciation to the Marymount tradition at LMU. And that's not just on script, that's the real deal. He's really been out there for us. He never fails to mention our Marymount heritage when speaking about LMU to audiences. His words and actions, his involvement in our Mary Milligan lecture series, and his reverence for the Marymount religious women and their engagement in faith, culture, and the arts as an expression of human spirit, sharing in God's creation is both important and truly exceptional. And that was written for me, but it's true. He embodies our mission that all may have life and live it to the full. Over a year ago, President Snyder wondered why there were no portraits of the Marymount College presidents hanging outside the president's office, as there were portraits of the presidents of LMU. Later tonight, thanks to President Snyder and the efforts of the marketing and communications at LMU, we will officially unveil, we have already unveiled them, the images of 6 women of the Marymount College presidents whose contributions helped LMU what it is today. So this is not my scripted part. In his heart, President Snyder is a mathematician, but deeper in his heart, he's a rock star. Please join me in welcoming President Snyder to speak tonight.
Thank you, Professor DeVroom, my beloved bandmate. I am delighted to welcome our cherished LMU family and friends. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're so happy to have you here in our Center for the Life Sciences. We are blessed to have with us a veritable who's who of LMU past, LMU present, LMU future, and that's particularly true of the members of the Griffin Circle, who should get a round of applause. They're celebrating their 50th anniversary as well. I thank Sister Joan Tracy, the Provincial Superior of the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary, and also an LMU trustee. Sister Tracy's leadership has helped transform LMU into becoming the welcoming, creative, and intellectually rigorous institution that we are today. Many wonderful sisters from the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary and also the Congregation of St. Joseph of Orange are in our company tonight. So I'd ask the R.S.H.M. and CSJ sisters to rise so we can welcome you appropriately. We treasure your devotion to our LMU family. We welcome Trustee Emeritus Kathy Aikenhead. Kathy, thank you for, where are you? Oh, there you are. Thank you for your guidance, your longtime guidance, your support and your generosity to our institution, to our faculty, our students, and certainly to our presidents. We welcome Trustee Christy Fry also, and JC, her husband. We welcome Henry Jordan. We welcome Steve Page, also trustees. Where are y'all? They were here at least. They're here. They're in the, Steve always gets the high budget seat. I don't know how that happens. We have, sorry, Steve, that was too easy. We have with us our regents, Gail Bernstein, Pat Kane, David Herbst, Steve Peters. They've graced us this evening as well. Where are y'all? If you could, thank you for being with us. Thanks to each of you. And we thank the shepherds of our evening, particularly the Academy of Catholic Thought and Imagination, led by Professor Brian Traynor. Brian, thank you so much for organizing this. It's hard to find people, especially when they're right in front of you. And we thank also Dr. DeVroom and the Marymount Institute and the Bellarmine Forum, which is championed by the Dean of the Bellarmine College of Liberal Arts, Robin Crabtree. We thank them as well. So how about a round of applause for them? We thank Senior Vice President of Student Affairs, Dr. Lainey Beauvais, from whom you will hear later this evening. I look forward to that because I sense there's a few things that are bottled up inside Lainey that she's been waiting 50 years to share. We thank Vice Provost of Academic Affairs, David Sapp, for being with us this evening. We thank Vice President of Mission and Ministry, John Sebastian. His is the office that binds together all things related to mission, and of course tonight is a prime example of that, so a round of applause for those colleagues as well. As I often point out at our AJCU, Association of Jesuit Colleges and Universities meetings, where the 28 Jesuit colleges and universities of the United States convene, LMU is the only one that came to life in collaboration with the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary. That is, we have twice as many genders as the competition, other than one that happens to be in Detroit, and so a little harder for them to get things done. But as we celebrate the Golden Jubilee of our thriving partnership, our gratitude abounds for what we have gained thanks to the foresight, the open-mindedness, and the flat-out risk that the leaders of Marymount College, including the mighty Sister Raymond McKay, R.S.H.M., and then Loyola University's revolutionary Reverend Charles Casasa, Society of Jesus. Think about what that must have been like, and think about some of those conversations in the corridors and the rattling going on in the rooms where they dwelled. I think that would be a very interesting thing to be involved in. But I think they saw the future in brilliant ways, and we owe so much to them every day as we succeed, particularly when our faculty and students in that critical moment, when it has to happen, get it done. Most Lions are aware that the merger of the two institutions took place in 1973. That's when we officially became Loyola Marymount University, but the affiliation piece might be less familiar to those who were not directly involved. It indeed marked a beautiful and still evolving partnership. It came not just with the rattling, but with adjustments, with some uncomfortable conversations, probably some awkward and alienating moments, particularly for the students. And again, Dr. Bove may share one or two of those with us as we go forward. By the way, I've not seen her remarks. I'm just speaking Laney inside my mind. So we celebrate with unwavering zeal, and this is the spark, this is the essence of the Marymount sisters, that persistence in seeking God, particularly through the arts, and that has been so beneficial to us as we think about our comprehensive campaign and helping the arts become more vibrant as a representation of God and as a pathway toward God and our greater spirituality. You can catch a glimpse of the portraits, my remarks say, indeed, when they are revealed, and they have been revealed. So these will be in the corridor outside the president's office. They have been in the corridor, and they are they're there along with the Loyola University portraits. We have a photographer in marketing and communication who is with us at dinner. John Rao, are you here? John, thank you so much for making this happen. So John immersed himself in this project for over a year, and as you may guess, some of the source material, particularly pre-internet, was not readily available. So he worked quite hard with Cynthia Becht, who's the head of the LMU Archives and Special Collections, and also with our beloved Dr. Renee Harang, the emeritus director of the Marymount Center. So what you see is not just great labor, but also great consultation, and we hope that our renderings are accurate. So I thank John, and I thank everybody involved with this project. Our keynote speaker this evening is Reverend Michael Engh, Society of Jesus, the 28th president of Santa Clara University. And I want to share, and I suspect Father Engh has heard this once or twice, I have to disclose some truth. Anytime I meet anybody at or from Santa Clara, I disclose to them that Father Engh is really an LMU guy. And I share that the successes that Father has brought to Santa Clara are founded on the training that he received here on the Bluff. So in this sense, Santa Clara University is an extension of Loyola Marymount University with half the genders in its religious leadership. But I also have to recognize another truth, and this is less jestful and arguably more supportive or supportable. So much of what LMU is results from Father Engh's contributions that he made during his 20 years here. So as Dean of the Bellarmine College of the Liberal Arts, Father Engh promoted an ambitious interreligious faith dialogue and initiative by establishing the Huffington Ecumenical Institute, the Doshi Professorship in Indic Religions, and at that time a brand new Jewish Studies program. And each of those programs remains healthy, but they were all founded during Father Engh's time as dean. He also raised over $15 million for endowed professorships and student scholarships. Those monies remain with us. And prior to his service as dean, Father Engh received a BA from, here it is again, Loyola University in Los Angeles, now LMU. He received an MA from Gonzaga University, a Master of Divinity from the Jesuit School of Theology at Berkeley, and then a doctorate in history from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Father is a generous teacher. He's known as a generous teacher. He's an astute historian. He's widely published, particularly on the history of Los Angeles and the role of religion in the American West. His 1996 interview with Sister McKay and Dr. Harang is really must-view. Dr. Bove can get you copies of that, should you not have them, but it's quite interesting to watch, and I was very much gripped when I watched that. So if you're an aficionado of affiliation, I think that'd be a good thing for you to explore. We are so proud, we are honored, and I think we're lucky to have Father Engh with us this evening. So please welcome Michael Engh back to LMU.
Thank you, Tim, for the introduction, and thank all of you for being here tonight. It's a great honor to be introduced by a rock star. It's one of the first times in my career that I've had that privilege. So I do enjoy that, and I'm very happy to be back here. In the dinner ahead of time, I was meeting some of you who were classmates of mine here at Loyola University of Los Angeles, and even one of my former students. So the fact that he would come back to hear me yet again when he was in the very first class I ever taught, it's a great honor to me. So I didn't scare him off. My gratitude goes to Brian Traynor, too, who first contacted me about the event, encouraged me to accept and answered many of my questions. Randy Roach shared with me the materials, both the text and the images, and then Cynthia Beck, the Director of Archives and Special Collections, located and copied then videos for this presentation. Lainey Beauvais also contributed a copy of Sister Raymond McKay's interview, which the Santa Clara Technology Department couldn't get to work. So I got to come back to LMU to get it to work, so thank you. And finally, I interviewed Father Terrence Mahan, who was the one-time Dean of the College of Arts and Science. He's now 94 years old. Memory is still very clear, and it was a very enjoyable interview. And he said, make sure you tell the funny stories. So, okay, I'm indebted to all of these people for this. I've organized my remarks tonight along 3 themes, each one highlighting a different aspect of the university's heritage. My address resembles, you might say, like a symphony, with these musical themes echoing through the 3 movements that include harmony and dissonance. You can consider my opening remarks then that follow as a prelude to this composition. The first theme is the Christian churches played a strong role in introducing higher education in Southern California. It began with the Roman Catholic Church. The first school here was 1865, then followed by the Methodists who started USC, the Presbyterians who started Occidental, and the Congregationalists who launched Pomona College. And then came the Baptists with University of Redlands in 1909. Then comes Loyola in 1911, and then comes Marymount in 1923. So the churches have played a major role. Second theme concerns the role of the Catholic bishops, and this is a very interesting theme. The initial bishops, and I'd say from 1865 to 1965, there was a very strong emphasis on defending the faith, protecting the faith of the laity from the times when there was great prejudice against Catholics in the public schools, in businesses, civic organizations, and city, county, and state government. So the hierarchy's attitudes of defense and protection shifted as American society changed and as Vatican II came along 62 to 65. And all of a sudden, gradually there emerged this whole new attitude towards the world. And then the subsequent archbishops of LA offered differing comments, and I'll come back to that again. That's very important about their attitudes towards higher education. And then the third theme is the 3 religious communities, those who created Loyola Marymount University and continue to influence the development according to their respective charisms. And so the emergence of the university involved then the foresight and labor of these early people, the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary, who brought their partners, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, into that initial affiliation of Marymount College with Loyola University, run by the Jesuits. That began in the mid-60s, 66, 67, 68, and continued into the merger of the two institutions, as you know, in 73. And so this school is the heir to very distinct traditions, and they distinguish LMU from any other university in Southern California. So I'll come back to that. So that's the prelude. The first movement. All higher education in Southern California began here at the end of the Civil War. The Spaniard, Thaddeus Amat, began the first school. Can I have the lights down a little? We already rehearsed this once before. We'd have the lights down some. Is anybody back there? I don't want these to wash out entirely. Okay. This is down at the LA Plaza, down below the cathedral. That's the Plaza Church, which still stands. Across from the plaza is the two-story Lugo family adobe. Here is where they started St. Vincent's College in 1865. It was begun by the bishop, who was a Spaniard, Thaddeus Amat. He has a high school named after him now. He was a Vincentian father, and so he invited other Vincentians, and they named the school St. Vincent's College, and they began their education in 1865. And in those days, when you launched a college, you enrolled grammar school, high school, and junior college students. So it was all one big mix. So each of the schools started largely in that way. And so the school moved twice, further and further out into the suburbs. First, they moved to 6th and Broadway, and then they moved all the way out to Washington and Grand, so just below the 10 freeway. So it was a later bishop, Thomas Conady, who really got the LA car culture down, as you see. He's sitting there in the back. And he was a great civic promoter. He was a person who reached out a lot to the community. He was a graduate of Holy Cross College back in Massachusetts, and he had been president of Catholic University in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, he was not a very good fundraiser, so they kicked him across the country to Los Angeles. But he envisioned a university, not a college, a university that would have schools of law and engineering. He wanted this school then to have these professional schools so that, again, to protect Catholics as they went ahead in their studies. Now, the Vincentians, who ran the St. Vincent's College, didn't share that vision. And so they withdrew through a series of complicated negotiations, and the bishop landed the Jesuits. But the Jesuit philosophy always was you start with 1 year, and then you add a second year, and then a third year. So they compromised that they couldn't do that. So they started then with a high school called Los Angeles College. Here are the boys at the time. This was located out in Highland Park, just off the Pasadena Freeway. And the original building still stands there. So somebody probably doesn't know they live in a building where a university began. They relocated the school to the west by downtown, by SC, a few years later. They began building what's now Loyola High School, but it was Loyola College eventually. It started off as Los Angeles College, became St. Vincent's College, and they changed it to Loyola College. So talk about an identity crisis. Loyola had a hard time at the beginning until they finally landed on this particular name. And so they went through this process. What they found out was if they took the name St. Vincent's, they'd be liable to all the debts the Vincentians had run up. And the Vincentians had gone broke in the Depression of 1907, had bought land. They were going to move the school out to what is now the Baldwin Hills. They went broke. And so they were very happy the bishop wanted to take the school off their hands. Well, the Jesuits weren't very happy when they found out about the debt. So it fell eventually then to a great leader. This is Father Joe Sullivan. Joe Sullivan was a showman. He was a great man about town. He was a civic promoter. He never did anything on the small. And so he became friends in L.A. with the much despised Jewish leaders in the early Hollywood industry. And so when the 1927 college graduation took place down at Loyola High School, he borrowed the set from Ben-Hur, the silent movie Ben-Hur. And you'll notice at the top, you can see some of the letters that spell out Loyola. The bishop is there. He's there. The Knights of Columbus are in top hats. It was a grand event. It was broadcast live by radio. And for this, This was Joe Sullivan in his glory. Everybody then involved in this. He later became friends with the leading rabbis in Los Angeles, and he also charmed the Protestant tycoons who were the big business leaders in Los Angeles, like Harry Chandler of the LA Times. And so with his enthusiasm of the 1920s, he recruited Harry Culver, who was the founder of Culver City down below us. And Culver offered Sullivan 100 acres if he could build 2 buildings within 2 years, 2 grade A buildings. And then the next door developer, Fritz Burns, who was developing then Playa del Rey, said he would help out and he would donate land to the Lutherans and they could have a college nearby, just across Lincoln Boulevard. Well, the Lutherans didn't come through, the Jesuits did. Father Sullivan got $300,000 in cash, $5 million in pledges, and plans for a $20 million campus. Unfortunately, we'll do the groundbreaking first. This is Father Carl Vondera, who shot this film, the groundbreaking out in Delray Hills. We'll just take a quick look at this. And so Sullivan wanted a great parade. There were over 5,000 people who came and sat on the bleachers. Here he comes processing in. That's himself right there, right just past us. That's Harry Culver walking by. Out comes from the car is Bishop Cantwell, Bishop of Los Angeles, and behind him comes Archbishop Hanna from San Francisco. So he called in all the top ecclesiastical dignitaries of the time. They set up the stands. The background, again, was provided by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, this great setup. And then you had not one brass band, not 2 brass bands, but keep counting them as they come through. The Army came through with the brass band. The Navy sent one up from San Pedro at the harbor. The ROTC came marching through as well. There was a delegation of Jewish rabbis. There was the Catholic nurses that came through. That's Fritz Burns. Fritz Burns on his horse just went by. I'm sorry we just missed him. The equestrians, here's the Catholic nurses coming, marching along. And somewhere out in that crowd is my grandmother, my grandfather, my mother, my great-grandparents. And I asked my grandmother, what do you remember from this? And she said, dust. 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 And so Sullivan never did anything by halves. And so this was the great launch then for Loyola College out here on the Delray Hills. Yet another band going by, and so it went. Keep in mind that Manchester Boulevard was not paved. Loyola Boulevard was not paved. This was really quite out in the sticks. And this is a delegation here of the international community of people with their various flags. Okay, here come the Greeks marching by. I don't know how long it took him to put this all together, but Joe Sullivan, as I said, never did anything by halves. Looking forward to what did they actually build? Xavier Hall, built there on the edge of the bluff, built above the great letter L for Loyola, and then St. Robert's Hall, with the dirt roads then that went up to eventually Loyola Boulevard. All of this was built in 1928-29, just in time for the stock market to crash in 1929 and the great beginning of the Great Depression. So the school was soon nicknamed Sullivan's Folly. And the provincial removed Sullivan, sent him to another assignment, and he died by the age of 50, just a year later. Loyola struggled to survive through the Great Depression. They based their future on college football. And that all-male enrollment then crept up to 500 students by the outbreak of World War II. Unfortunately, this is actually the lair. It's the repurposed construction shack moved on campus, and I don't know what they're avoid social suicide, and there's something hanging there from the book. Anyway, the Loyola men were pretty energetic. When the war broke out, they enrolled in droves, and that 500 students soon became 50 students. And so the school only survived because the president, Father Ed Whalen, went back to Washington, D.C., and he secured a government contract to educate Army officers, and St. Robert's Hall was soon then filled with 900 military men going through a 3-semester program in 12 months that prepared them as officers in the war. That's the contract that saved the school, because within 1 year, those men had all shipped out for the invasion of D-Day in June of 1944. So let's go one step further. When the war ended and the GI Bill attracted large numbers of returning veterans, one of the veterans was Father Dick Rolfs, then Mr. Rolfs, who then came. Others who had fought in the Pacific soon encountered Japanese and Japanese Americans who'd been released from the internment camps. How did this happen? Father Whalen had gotten a phone call from the pastor of the Catholic Church down in Little Tokyo, St. Francis Xavier. And the pastor pointed out that the prejudice was still so strong against the Japanese in Los Angeles, they couldn't find jobs, they couldn't find places to live. And so Father Whalen then began hiring as many Japanese as he could. And if you look through, this is the payroll records down in archives and special collections. You'll notice then Watanabe, Takeuchi, Yanare, Asano, all the way down the line. So over those first years after the war, he was hiring them, and as they got on their feet and saved money, and they got other permanent jobs, they left, so they rotated out of LMU, Loyola, at the time. Because it was hard for them to get housing, he converted the basement of St. Robert's Hall into a dormitory for the Japanese and Japanese Americans. Some of them lived on over 20 years. And this is a shot here of on the far left is Dorothy Tanaka and her husband. Dorothy worked in the registrar's office. Her husband's standing behind her. He laid out our baseball field and planted the trees behind it. In the front of the Takeuchis, they lived in the gym. They did all the laundry for the athletic teams in those days. And then on the far right is Tommy Saito, who worked in the kitchen of the Jesuit residence. Standing behind them is Father John Clark, who was the academic vice president at the time. And so let me just pause there. We've got to get back to Marymount. So let's turn our attention to Marymount. And the person that's most important there is Mother Marie Joseph Butler, the religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary. She was sent to the United States in 1903 by the Generalate. She came with the directives to expand the work of the sisters and to found a school called Marymount on Hudson. That was in 1907. She expanded that school until it became a college in 1919. So the progress of this school attracted the attention of the new Bishop of Los Angeles, John J. Cantwell, and I'll come back to him again. He invited Mother Butler to visit Los Angeles and open a school to educate young Catholic women. His purpose, preserve the young women from godless schools and the temptation to marry non-Catholic men. So it was very clear that this defensive attitude of preserving the faith was animating him to invite the sisters. So Mother Butler made the trip out to Los Angeles with a companion. They explored different sites. She rented an old estate down near USC, which is now a sorority house, and still stands. And they launched Marymount of the West in 1923. And that was under the leadership of Mother Cecilia Rafter. Mother Cecilia we only have a picture of her in her later years. I have yet to find one of her in her earlier years. But anyway, she began the whole process. Classes started on the first day. They had 6 students from grammar school to high school. But the school proved popular. It grew, and the sisters realized they had to move. And so in 1932, they moved out to Westwood. UCLA was just building its campus, and so the sisters built their school across the street in order to benefit from the exposure to the library and be there. So we get some idea of the opening of the school in this lovely little clip that we find of the dedication in 1932 as people arrive in some classic cars for the dedication ceremonies. And what I've noticed so far is it's all the clergy that's getting out of the cars. So here we have appropriate monsignors and others. Okay, boys. Okay, some of the parents and the mothers of the students that were going to be coming to be enrolled here. Waiting for the bishop. Here's the bishop showing up. It's actually in the next car. Sorry about that. It's not the bishop. Sorry. That's the bishop. And the lady in the ermine is his sister, Nellie, who actually many thought ran the diocese. But anyway. So once we get everybody in, we'll have a glimpse then of the dedication. The procession coming out then with banners and young people. And you'll glimpse the sisters from time to time as they guide the things forward. And it was a beautiful, magnificent building that they erected there. And then the bishop, as he goes on then to bless all of this. On these 7.5 acres that they had purchased in Westwood, the Bishop Cantwell came again and again for the graduation ceremonies. And so in 1933, they began the junior college division, which then would continue to grow over the years. And by the 1940s, however, with the end of World War II and the beginning of prosperity again, the sisters decided to go from a 2-year college to a 4-year college, and that was in 1948. And so when I read through the records, then there was a very strong emphasis, and this is quoting one of the presidents at the time, that this was the preparation of young women for marriage so that they could then raise families to keep alive the Catholic faith. That'll change in a moment when I talk to Raymond McKay. The expansion of the school then began a whole series of discussions, and it was Mother Gertrude Kane. Well, here's how the school expanded. You can see why they needed a new facility for the college. And it's in 1948-49. Mother Gertrude Kane, sitting at the head of the table, she assembled the first board of regents. She thought big. Sitting next to her, beyond her right, is Tom Levy, the rather tall gentleman. Across the table, second from the right, the edge is Alfred Bloomingdale from that department store chain. Pat Crowley, who later started the National Catholic Register, and others became the businessmen who stood behind the school and said, yes, indeed, sister, you really do need to buy more land. So what they did then is they scouted around the Bay Area, and the Bay Area. You think I'm in a different part of the state. The South Bay Area. And they located 45 acres out on the Palos Verdes Peninsula, overlooking the Pacific. They built then 4 beautiful buildings with boarding facilities there. And one of the reasons they chose this was because the California State College system was going to expand and build a new campus rumored to be on the Palos Verdes Peninsula. So they thought they would get there first and then have the same kind of access they had as they had at UCLA. So when this happened, they were set up there, and they slowly discovered, they had at the time between 300 and 350 students there in 1964, which was the 4th year they were in operation. So let me shift back now to Loyola. I don't want to get you dizzy on this, but back at Loyola, there was a new president, Charles Casassa. He came in 1949. He was a philosophy teacher at Santa Clara University, okay? He was the first president at Loyola to have earned a doctorate from the University of Toronto. He was a medieval philosopher. 39 years old, a native of San Francisco, never lived in Los Angeles, and yet he would spend the next 20 years of his life refounding Loyola. The picture I have here of him is he's blessing the site for the Seaver Science Building. That's Frank Seaver next to him, and then Fritz Burns beyond him. It was Charlie that began building then the modern facilities. First he began with the Sacred Heart Chapel, but then he built others. One thing that's really important to remember about Charlie was he was a man ahead of his times. He advocated strongly civil rights, interreligious and ecumenical collaboration, and the defense of academic freedom. Now, this is the time of the Cold War, and so he didn't always gain friends, and that began with the Archbishop of Los Angeles, James Francis McIntyre, who then developed a rather frosty relationship with Father Casassa. Number 1, intercollegiate football. That had started up at Loyola after the World War II, and in 1951, the team was actually nationally ranked. So they had scheduled a game in the University of Texas system down in El Paso, and when the team arrived there, and here's our squad, you'll notice in the middle, number 41, that's Bill English. They learned that, first of all, he couldn't stay in a hotel that had white people. He had to stay at a separate hotel. He couldn't stay with a team. And second of all, they did this, the football field was segregated, so he wasn't allowed to play on that field. So the coach contacted Casassa. Casassa contacted the administrators there at the University of Texas system. They went back and forth. And finally, Casassa came to the conclusion that all play or nobody plays. So Loyola forfeited the game, lost their national rankings. And just to make things a little more to the point, the next year, Casassa canceled football. And he diverted the funds to academics, and there were a number of alumni who never got over that. Keep in mind at the time that Archbishop McIntyre says there was no race problem in Los Angeles. Charlie started what was known as the Human Relations Institute in the summer of '53. He'd been approached by members of the American Jewish Committee in Los Angeles who were combating anti-Semitism. And so they agreed to fund with Charlie the Human Relations Institute to train people on interreligious toleration and then also interracial understanding. Among the first 20 people who enrolled, you'll see there's an African-American sitting there on the far left. That's Tom Bradley. He was a policeman in the LAPD. He was ready to throw in the towel, as he later said, because of the racism in the police department. This summer institute turned him around and got him to thinking there may be ways to work forward, and there may actually be white people who would believe in issues that could be solved. Sitting in the back is one of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange. One of them, she's not the only one, but one of them was Sister Agnes Marie Schoen. Sister Agnes Marie then later came here to campus ministry, worked here for many years, but 1953 she was in that first group and later came. So let's just step forward a moment. In 1966, after this had been running for a while, Charlie Casassa got invited to a dinner, and it was all the major colleges and universities of Los Angeles. It was an educational leaders dinner, and he was seated next to a new president of Marymount College, Sister Raymond McKay. They had never met. So sitting next to each other, that was the beginning of their conversation. And she turned to him and she asked, had Loyola ever thought of starting a branch campus in the Palos Verdes Peninsula? Casassa looked at her and said, no, he hadn't, never thought about that. So that's the tip-off for the ways that Sister Raymond then began attacking the issues that they were facing there out there on the peninsula. Here she is with Sister Gertrude Kane standing there on the peninsula. Sister Raymond was very interested in the issues because the Cal State system decided to build at Dominguez Hills and not on the Palos Verdes Peninsula. There was no public transportation, and so the students were pretty isolated out there in terms of social activities. Enrollment was not growing, and even with, they had an excellent, innovative curriculum going, she really feared about the long-term viability of an all-women's college. Now, this is the 1960s. What are women's colleges and all men's colleges doing in those days? They're either going co-ed, they're merging, or they're closing. So, ever the innovator, McKay then approached Mother Felix Montgomery, the Superior General of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, and proposed that their sister training college in Orange actually relocate to Marymount and bring their faculty with their doctorates and bring their students to come out to the Palos Verdes Peninsula, which Mother Felix agreed to, and then they began the operation there out on the peninsula. Sister McKay didn't stop. She then approached Charlie Casassa with another creative proposal. If Marymount purchased the open land west of the Loyola campus, which was then Beanfields, could the two schools affiliate like the Claremont colleges? Two schools side by side, and could they even attract maybe Mount St. Mary's or Immaculate Heart College to build out there as well? The land at the time was owned by Howard Hughes, who had no great love for Loyola, and that's a whole other story we'll tell for another time. So Casassa said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Let's go ahead with that. He had tried for 5 years to get now Cardinal McIntyre to agree to coeducation. Could Loyola go co-ed? And Cardinal McIntyre replied emphatically that it was theologically, spiritually, and morally unacceptable for women to go to school with men. Theologically, spiritually, and morally unacceptable. So Father Casassa explained this to Sister McKay. He said, here's the obstacle we're up against. Well, she couldn't convince Howard Hughes to sell the land to her, so she proposed to Casassa that Marymount erect its buildings on the Loyola campus, because they had all this extra land where there was ample space. And this little video is a great one. Here's the Loyola campus, flying over, don't get seasick. There's the 9-hole golf course on the left, the open fields. We're gradually approaching the library and the Seaver Science Building. The Central Mall in those days had cars all over it. Sunken Gardens actually had gardens. Those are the roses and the bougainvillea out there. Hughes aircraft down below in those open fields. It's now Playa Vista. Of course, the L for Loyola from Father Sullivan's time. Xavier Hall, and then looking back. So, she was right. There was plenty of open land out there. And then Casassa was very skeptical about getting Archdiocesan approval. Casassa agreed and explained to her again the rather icy relationship between Loyola and the Cardinal. So he proposed that she go talk to the Cardinal. So McKay took up the challenge. She went down, she explained the situation of Marymount, she explained what the situation, and the Cardinal readily and warmly accepted her plan. She called it co-instruction. And co-instruction in his mind meant the men would attend classes first, they would leave, then the women would come in and use the same facilities, and then they would leave, and then the men would come back. Okay, so she didn't disabuse him of his mistake. She avoided the inflammatory language of coeducation, and he readily agreed and became a champion then of Marymount moving to Loyola. She then went home and triumphantly phoned Father Casassa, who promptly wanted to fall off his chair. He was stunned, but she had pulled this off. So then Casassa had other issues that come up. He felt he encountered strong opposition from Loyola students and Loyola alumni and many members of the Jesuit community. Now remember, this is the 1960s, and in the 60s, many religious communities faced divisive issues. And the Loyola Jesuit community was bitterly divided at the time. So at the time, the board of trustees was Father Casassa and 4 Jesuits. And so we found one ally in Father Terence Mahan, who was then the dean of the College of Arts and Science and a trustee. And so he then appointed Father Mahan to work with Sister Renee Harang, who was the dean at Marymount. And they were to work out the logistics of the affiliation of co-instruction. And so I'll get a picture later here. This is McKay when they eventually built in the Marymount facilities. That's Dorothy Levy, that's Tom Levy, and that's Cardinal McIntyre, who was her great champion. So, now, it became very obvious to Casassa and to Mahan that there were many Loyola faculty who would not accept Marymount as an equal partner in this affiliation. And the professors believed that Loyola's better facilities, larger library, and more numerous programs such as engineering and the sciences really outclassed Marymount. They felt that Loyola was their school, and they feared changes that would come with affiliation. Father Mahan. Father Mahan and Sister Renee then began a series of TGIFs on Friday to bring faculty together. They agreed then that the Marymount's 4 departments, which were psychology, English, history, and modern languages, would merge immediately. And so rather than having 2 history departments, they would have 1. And one of those professors, Carol Sullivan, is here tonight, who was on that original faculty. Welcome, Carol. Glad to see you. I remember those days since I was a history major, and I remember the classes that we had because Carol came as a medievalist, Dr. John York did modern Europe, Margaret Renehan, came then as an Africanist, and then Martha Ann Fitzpatrick came as an Americanist. All four brought doctorates to add to the department. So Father Mahan told me in the interview that all the departments got along except modern languages. And something about European rivalries were such that the former chair of the Marymount Modern Language and the current chair of the Loyola Modern Languages got into competition of who could speak the most foreign languages. The Loyola man won because he spoke Hungarian, because his wife spoke Hungarian. So now it goes on from there. The other thing they did was they hosted dinners for people to get. And there was an annual faculty dinner at Christmas time where the wine flowed freely. One Marymount professor of speech demeaned the Loyola speech department. One Loyola speech professor disputed this slur. A verbal altercation ensued that led to the two men duking it out physically, bloodying one another's noses, until the Loyola combatant had to face his wife, who came and said, "Take me home." Ever after, the Loyola faculty member was nicknamed Slugger Sherlock. Warren Sherlock, Slugger Sherlock. They told that story at his funeral. So anyway, let's move on then as it goes forward. The upper class members of the Loyola, of the Marymount student body ran into the opposition of the Loyola boys. The Marymount women thought of themselves as somewhat more sophisticated than the Loyola boys. This is freshman orientation at Loyola University. It's a tug of war over a mud pit between the sophomores and the freshmen. So I don't know why the women found the Loyola boys uncouth. Okay. In the time of from 68 to 73, then the student governments of the two schools merged. So they became the next step of the merger. It then gradually dawned on the administration that it was really cumbersome to have two presidents, two boards of trustees, two registrars, and should they really start thinking about merging, coeducation? This is where God intervened and Cardinal McIntyre retired. The new Archbishop, Timothy Manning, came in. He was a great friend of the Jesuits, having been trained by them in Ireland, and he was a friend of the Marymount sisters. So talks began in the early 1970s. Father Casassa had retired to be the chancellor, and Sister Raymond really didn't want to be president of the consolidated institution. So the next new Loyola president was Father Don Merrifield. He was a nuclear physicist with a degree from MIT. And he and Sister Raymond began then the discussion about a merger, the former merger of the two schools. And so in 1973, when this came about, I got to get ahead of myself. To make this happen, they had a Loyola team and a Marymount team working together to iron out then the formal merger. Sister Raymond called upon René Harangue again to lead the Marymount negotiations. The Loyola negotiator was Ernie Sanchez. He was the first lay trustee, chair of the Board of Trustees for Loyola. So they worked out all the details over extended meetings, many, many meetings, until the final point was what would the name of the new school be? Would it be Marymount College of Loyola University? Marymount College at Loyola University? Would it be a new name altogether? Would it be Los Angeles University? And finally, Sister Renee came back to Sister McKay and said, they won't budge. And so in her own way, she did neither. She said, no Marymount, no merger. And with that, the Jesuits agreed, and Ernie Sanchez agreed. So that was 1973. Sister Raymond then returned to the Palos Verdes Peninsula. She taught economics there, she taught economics here, and then eventually retired back to New York City. Merrifield then looked west of the campus, approached the trustees of the Howard Hughes estate, and he bought that land, which we now call then the Levy campus. That was because of the gift of the Dorothy and Thomas Levy Foundation, great friends of the Marymount sisters, and now of the new Loyola Marymount. So here's where I'm going to go fast forward because we're now past the affiliation and the formal merger. The great challenge then was the development of the Levy campus, and here we see the development in this is the O'Malley Apartments. Named for Father Tom O'Malley, who a great ebullient man, a classicist in the same kind of tradition of Joe Sullivan. Outgoing, witty, funny. And he dedicated himself to a very interesting cause, and that was to diversify the faculty, the staff, and the student body. And it was O'Malley who took up the idea that the demographics of Loyola Marymount should mirror the demographics of Los Angeles. So that meant scholarships to bring in more students. That meant diversifying the faculty and the staff. That then was carried forward then by his successor, Bob Lawton, with the help here. This is Chad Dreyer. These are the two that got the Raytheon building. We actually purchased it, and it became part of the Loyola campus. And so it's due to their work that this came about. And then the developments of the last 10 years are the ones that you are most familiar with. David R.S.H.M. later left the deanship of Loyola Law and became provost and then president. He then made the distinctive contributions, particularly through successful fundraising and then elevating the profile of LMU in Southern California. Carried on then by our present worthy successor, Tim Law Snyder, and his wife, Carol, to make this, then, Loyola Marymount, the University of Silicon Beach, with the campus extended down to Playa Vista. So, let me pause right there. I want to bring it to the conclusion. I'm going to offer a couple of observations about all this, about the significance of the development of Loyola Marymount since the affiliation. One of the main things that took place was Vatican II, that took place in the Catholic Church, 62 to 65, and a whole revolution that took place in the lives of the religious and in the role of the laity in the Catholic Church. And so the hierarchy cautiously began entrusting the laity with greater responsibility. But it was religious, such as the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, the Marymount Sisters, and the Jesuits, who really embraced the spirit of cooperation with the laity much more readily. Now, the reasons may vary and the results may have been uneven at times. There may have been a little dissonance along the way, but the reality remains that the charism and the spirit of the founding orders now rest in the hands of the lay people, lay trustees, faculty and staff, the administration. And so, as we look at Loyola Marymount today, I'm reminded of an article that just came out in America Magazine this week by Mick McCarthy, formerly of Santa Clara. He wrote this article, Jesuit Education in an Age of Anxiety, and he examines the challenges that face modern Catholic higher education, primarily Jesuit institutions. Now, the whole essay is valuable and it's really worth you reading, but if we consider Loyola Marymount's life as a Catholic institution, I think McCarthy raises an important caveat. I'm going to quote, "Their survival as Jesuit institutions will depend on how deeply boards and faculties truly understand and are committed to the very distinctive mission." And that very distinctive mission is what sets LMU apart. LMU has responded creatively to fostering that distinctive mission. And here I'm thinking about the Center for Ignatian Spirituality, the Marymount Institute for Faith, Culture, and the Arts, the Sisters of St. Joseph's Center for Reconciliation and Justice. To that, I would add then the Center for Service and Action in the Division of Student Affairs, and then the Academy of Catholic Thought and Imagination. All of these animate in new ways the founder's vision of what Catholic higher education should be. They show what McCabe believed was the true potential of women to be leaders and equal. They also carry on this legacy then that Casassa had in terms of civil rights and interreligious dialogue. So the importance of this legacy can't be overestimated. And now when you add to that then the predominant secular model of higher education in the United States, the diminishing numbers then of religious, LMU, like all Catholic schools, has to take very seriously its own legacy. And so tonight I've cited the work of Raymond McKay and Charlie Casassa at the time of the affiliation and then to the merger with Brene Harang and Terry Mann. And it's their examples that really inspire me. They provide models of courage and creativity, of compassion and commitment, compromise and cooperation. So I have to make a little comment here. I'm not overlooking all the lay people. I'm thinking about people like Rose St. Onge, Ron Barrett, John Davis, John Papiden, Joanne Connolly, who's here, Jane McMillan on the staff, Mary David Collins, Peg Dolan. These are all the people that made up the representatives of the whole LMU family. And though I've talked about the leaders, these are the people, whether the librarians or lab assistants, faculty or food service workers, administrative assistants or development directors, these are the people that make up the whole enterprise here. You know who they are. You can add names to my names. These are the people that have bought into the whole legacy here and keep this spirit alive. And so the challenge now that we have, this is what I'm going to wrap up with, is how do we continue to find the expression of the founders, their ideals that are stated succinctly in the university's mission statement. Like McKay and Cassass at the time of the affiliation, we have to be, you have to be, to continue to adapt to changing circumstances. And I'm thinking about the issues of affordability, access, diversity, inclusion, gender equality, gender fluidity, wages and benefits. All of these things face schools now. And the answer McKay would have, the answer Cassass would have, would be innovate, innovate, innovate. In dialogue, collaboration, experimentation, LMU's got to continue to discern how best to survive and grow. And while discerning, it has to draw upon the animating vision that's at the heart of the DNA of this institution. And that means drawing on the spirituality of St. Ignatius Loyola, who recognized God's presence in all things and in all people. So this is LMU's distinctive legacy as a Marymount and Jesuit institution. Distinguishes you from any other institution in Southern California, and that's the living tradition, the legacy that's really worth all the struggle, all the sweat and tears, all the hard work. So thank you for your attention tonight, and as Jesus said in the Bible, go Lions. Okay. You're welcome. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Father Engh. LMU was I was fortunate enough that this is my first job when I came out of graduate school at Boston College, and every time I learn more about the community of which I'm a part and at which I'm living out my vocation, I get prouder and prouder about being part of this community and trying to continue that legacy. So thanks very much. We've got two other segments here that I just want to introduce briefly to you. We've got one more speaker coming up. Everyone here knows this speaker, either as the Senior Vice President of Student Affairs or as a robust champion for free speech, for which he was honored last year with the Louis E. Englehart First Amendment Award, or perhaps as a woman with extraordinary commitment to our students. This is the way in which I know her, and she's got my utmost respect in this regard. What you might not have known or been aware of is that Dr. Lainey Beauvais is one of Marymount College's pioneers. She was Marymount College's senior class president, as well as the first president of the Griffin Circle, some of whom you saw here tonight at the earlier parts of our evening, which is the only service org at LMU that still has roots on the peninsula with Marymount. In 2015, Dr. Beauvais received the Victor Yanatelli Society of Jesus Award in recognition of her outstanding service to student affairs work in Jesuit and Catholic higher education. She's also exceptionally active in Division I athletics, having served on 2 NCAA cabinets, and she was president of the WCC for 9 years. I know we're all excited to hear Dr. Beauvais' perspective about the move to the Bluff, and thus, without further ado, please join me in welcoming her for their comments.
Thank you, Brian. I want you to know that this jacket is 50 years old. I throw very little away. A big thank you to ACTI, to the Bellarmine Forum, to the Marymount Institute for sponsoring this program and recognizing this historic moment in our 107-year history. And to you, Father Engh, it's nice to have you back on the bluff. You really are a lion. I don't know what the hell you've been doing being a Bronco for all those years. Good evening, everyone. Trustees, regents, faculty, staff, students, and a special welcome to Loyola alums, Marymount alums, LMU alums. It's nice to be with you. I must admit, however, that I would rather be in the audience than up here, but somehow I wasn't paying close attention in a meeting. My charge here this evening is to give some reflections about my Marymount education. So here's what I thought I would do. I will divide my brief remarks into 3 parts, just like Father Engh. As you know, I have been around the Jesuits for a very long time, and I now think in 3s. It was a technique that was perfectly honed by Father Lawton, LMU's 14th president. He was the master of the 3-part talk. First, I'll talk a little bit about myself, not because it's fashionable to be narcissistic, but because it will show my education by the R.S.H.Ms, why it was so impactful. Second, I'll tell you a few stories about our time during the first affiliation year. And lastly, I'll talk about the influence and the importance of the R.S.H.Ms. So here's a little bit about me. I was born in New York, grew up in America's heartland, Marion, Indiana. My parents were first-generation Italian. My father's family was from the south of Rome, Gonzaga, home of Thomas Aquinas, for the theologians in the room. And my mother's family was from a small hill town in Tuscany. Neither of my parents graduated from high school. My mother was one of the world's great Italian cooks, and my father was a small businessman. It was a very traditional, loving Italian household where my mom took care of the home and family, and my father was the breadwinner and the ruler of the house. Growing up, there were a few things that were seared in my memory for both my brother and myself. The expectation was that we would be good students and go to college, that we would be leaders and not followers, and that come hell or high water, we would be home to have dinner every night with the family, where we'd have lively conversations 99% of the time about politics. I loved my childhood. But as I became older, it became clear to me that while my father planted the seeds for leadership and independence, it was really leadership and independence as defined by an Italian papa. And the definition did not include career and ambition. And to be sure, those sentiments were both explicitly and implicitly affirmed by the other members of the extended Italian family. Life goes on. Eventually, my brother goes off to the Naval Academy, and when it becomes time for me to choose the college, I decide to go to all-women's college, really not knowing why, other than my brother was at an all-men's college. So in the fall of 1965, having never been to California, I become a first-year student at Marymount College in Palos Verdes. Talk about first-generation shock. I had had very little exposure to Catholicism other than Sunday Mass and Saturday morning catechism. And yet, here I was surrounded by these women in these very heavy blue gabardine full habits who looked like they were from very definitely another era. I was also surrounded by beautiful, young, blonde, tan co-eds who used a lot of strange slang, like bitchin'. And right outside my hall window was the Pacific Ocean, marine land, and fields, not of corn and soybeans, but of beautiful flowers owned and tended to by the Japanese Americans. Talk about La La Land. And while I have lots of wonderful stories about those 3 years in Palos Verdes, that is for a different talk, as Father Engh said. On to the affiliation year. In August of 1968, I picked up my sweet mate, Maria Mercedes Gutierrez, who was from Bogota, Colombia, at O'Hare Airport. We drove across the country to get to California a week before school started. I was the student body president and had to prepare for student government activities. We got to campus and settled in the brand new McKay Hall on Westchester campus. To cut to the chase, neither senior class was happy. We didn't want to be there with the Loyola boys, and they didn't want us. They were particularly upset that the Marymount facilities sat on top of their golf course. But it is really important to note here, the freshmen, the sophomores, and the juniors of both institutions were absolutely thrilled. They loved that the schools were co-ed. For them, it was a natural way of proceeding. For the senior women, it really turned our existence upside down. Let's start with the basics. We had to dress differently. When we were all women, and you were late for class in the morning, you just hiked up your nightgown, put on a belt, and put your trench coat over it, and went to class. No makeup and a ponytail. Well, that certainly changed. Now we got up early for class, we agonized over what to wear, and we put makeup on. We were definitely dressing for the men. Secondly, in the classroom, there was a different way of behaving. It wasn't that it was more rigorous, but it was more combative and certainly actively competitive. And probably most profoundly, it interfered with female bonding. There is something very special that happens at an all-women's college regarding the important female connection. And that connection, writ large, is very hard to capture when the male sex is present. All that being said, having a common enemy, and I mean that loosely and lovingly, gave us a different focus. We felt that there was definitely a power imbalance. There were more of them, and this was their turf. So we had to prove ourselves to be superior. In the October 7th edition of the 1968 Loyolan, Father Rolfs, the same Father Rolfs who came after World War II, was the dean of students, and he wrote the letter to the editor. I think that we must all realize that this new and different type of coordinated education is bound to run into roadblocks. There will undoubtedly be misunderstandings, frustrations, jealousies, and even unpleasant solutions to many differences. But as a community of Christians, it seems to me that we will be able to grow in understanding and in a willingness to give. He goes on to say, since we are aware that the Marymount students are coming from a small and intimate type of college, we will understand their efforts to overplay the identity role. Well, we did overplay the identity role. We continue to refer to them as Loyola boys and to ourselves as Marymount women. We created the Blue Stocking Lounge on the senior wing of the 4th floor of McKay in homage to the educated intellectual women of the 18th century Blue Stocking Society in England. It became our bastion for holding on to what we thought it was we were losing. And towards the end of the year, we decided that we would indeed put our mark on the campus, literally. We all assembled in the Blue Stocking Lounge about 2 in the morning. We were dressed in black. We had bought paintbrushes and water-based navy blue paint because we couldn't find Colombian blue. And we snuck around the campus putting big M's on everything. We were so pleased with ourselves. And actually, I think the nuns were secretly pleased with us as well, as none of us got into any real trouble. My last story of that affiliation year has to do with graduation. It had been decided, primarily for economic reasons, that there would be one graduation, combining both Loyola University and Marymount College. We, the women, were outraged. How could Mother Raymond and Mother Peter Damien, a.k.a. Renee Harang, sell us down the river? So it was decided by the women of the Blue Stocking Lounge that since I was the student body president, I should speak to the chair of the Board of Trustees, unbeknownst, of course, to the administration. So I made an appointment and drove to Beverly Hills to meet with Gail Livingston in his office. To be truthful, I really don't remember the conversation. I just remember that his office was filled with Oscars and platinum records, and as a kid from the farmland, I was really impressed. In any case, we had a conversation. He then had a conversation with Mother Raymond, who in turn had a not-so-gentle conversation with me. And on June 13, 1969, the 53 Marymount women of the class of 1969 had their own graduation ceremony in the courtyard of McKay. Our yearbook dedication to Mother Raymond read in part, "We have been inspired through your leadership and example to look outward into a modern world. As freshmen, we were initiated into a uniquely conceived plan. The need for Christian men and women to be educated in terms of their unique goals and needs in an atmosphere of shared facilities and faculty. We have been the seed and the fulfillment of this hope. We, as Christian women in a modern world, thank you, Mother Raymond, for your guidance and foresight." The third and last part of my reflection has to do with the influence of the Sisters of the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary and the impact of my Marymount education. In some ways, it's even silly to try to distinguish between the two. That is not to say we didn't have great lay professors who were rigorous and inspiring. We did, and we could all name them today: Madame Lempar, Virginia Barnell, Lenore Salvanesky, John York, and many more. But it was the religious women who shaped and formed us. They provided the vision. They encouraged knowledge, character, and friendship. In Mother Raymond's invitation to join in the adventure, she said, "Marymount College seeks to create a community of adventurous scholars, unfettered by academic tradition, in a setting in which Christian women may develop an inquiring and creative personality and prepare herself for her commitment to the changing world. The college aims to produce the woman who, by engaging in a constant dialogue with her environment, can discover herself and develop her potential while enjoying the freedom to differentiate." She went on to say that it is the education of a woman in time, a woman who, possessed of deep faith in the destiny of humanity, is characterized by respect for the past, a concern for the present, and a passion for the future. To bring this back to the beginning of my talk, my parents, particularly my father, planted within me the seeds of leadership and independence. But it was at Marymount College where those seeds were nurtured and cultivated. I had women role models and mentors who offered many different ideas on the ways of proceeding in life. Even the day-to-day environment was encouraging and eye-opening in that every position of leadership and influence was held by a competent, bright, creative, hardworking woman. Intellect, creative, independent thinking, and leadership were encouraged. But interestingly enough, so was graciousness, gratitude, and respect. I was taught by the R.S.H.Ms that a modern woman did not have to sacrifice one for the other, that they were compatible. And it was where I learned that the how is as important as the what. And as a student, I was fortunate enough to be able to learn from some of the best: Mother Raymond, Mother Peter Damien, Mother Bernard Mary, A.K. Mary Milligan, Mother Mary David, Mother Martin, to just name a few. Lastly, I would be remiss to speak of the affiliation year if I didn't mention the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange. As Father Engh mentioned, they collaborated with the R.S.H.Ms to effectuate the educational adventure. Unfortunately, my only opportunity as a student to engage with them was my last year in college, but they too provided us with powerful role models. The sisters most engaged with us that first year were Sister Nancy, who called me every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to be sure that I made my 8 o'clock class. Sister Suzanne and Sister Martha Ann, who I still reference today in the American history class I took from her. Before I end, I would like to just formally acknowledge the 6 religious women presidents who gave form and shape to Marymount College: Mother Ignatius, Mother Gertrude, Mother St. Clair, Mother Aquinas, Mother de Sacré-Cœur, and Mother Raymond, and thank them for their grit, their humanity, and passion for excellence. Catholic higher education is indebted to them. In that same vein, like Theresia, I would like to thank our 16th president of Loyola Marymount University, Timothy Law Snyder, for his unfailing recognition of Marymount's tradition and charism and her important contributions to the foundation of Loyola Marymount University. Thank you. And as I like to say in my present role, go Lions.
Thanks very much. I'm honored here at the end of our evening to introduce Sister Joan Tracy to lead us in a benediction. Sister Tracy is the Provincial Superior of the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary and an LMU trustee. Her leadership and her support for the Marymount Institute for Faith, Culture, and the Arts, for the Peg Dolan R.S.H.M. Campus Ministry Center, for the Mary Milligan Lecture Series, and for the Sister Raymond McKay R.S.H.M. Scholarship have helped to transform LMU into the university it is today. From 1981 to 1986, Sister Joan served as LMU's provost and director of the spiritual program. She's also a former liaison for LMU's president to the Committee on the Status of Women. Sister Joan earned her BA in English from Marymount College, an MA in theology from St. Mary's College, and completed postgraduate studies at St. Mary's Seminary and University. Her spiritual counseling throughout Southern California has strengthened the region and LMU in a variety of meaningful ways. So please join me in welcoming Sister Joan Tracy.
I don't want any of you to worry because I was told I had 5 minutes. So I won't be long, and I have a 3-point benediction. I'd like to begin by remembering a PBS NewsHour that I watched last week. It was a reporter interviewing an old man on Easter Island. And those of you who might be familiar with Easter Island, it is full of statues of the ancestors of the families of Easter Island. And you know Easter Island is an island in the South Pacific. The reporter was discussing how pollution and tourism was destroying the island. And in the segment, the old man that was talking to the reporter just looked at him and said, pointing to the statues, "Remember, the ancestors are watching." After watching that segment, I couldn't help but reflect on the ancestors of our 50-year history. The history of this campus, Loyola, Marymount, and Loyola Marymount, a trinity. In one of the letters to a young poet, Rilke wrote, referring to our forebears, saying, "They are not only watching us, but they are part of us." And I'd like to quote him. He says about our ancestors, "They are in us, those long departed ones. They are in our inclinations, our moral burdens, our pulsing blood, and in the gestures that arise from the depths of time." And so I would invite you just for a moment, if you would recall some ancestor of Loyola, of Marymount, or of Loyola Marymount that you have been involved with, whether departed or still living, and whom you would consider an ancestor to you. And I'll pause for a moment just so you can visualize one or two people that come to your mind. And now let us honor them with this prayer. Beloved ancestors, your presence stretches back through the ages. It touches and influences the deep part of us each day. Your strength sings in our spirits. Your courage abides in our hearts. Your resilience resonates in our bones. Your love abounds in our souls. And may we remember how connected we are to these enduring qualities. We offer gratitude for how the best of you, our ancestors, continues to find life in us. We ask this through our greatest ancestor, Jesus Christ. Amen. And now Brian has an announcement.
Thanks very much, Sister. So I just want to thank everyone again for joining us this evening and to thank all of our speakers. I've been asked to remind folks that for those of you who are still up for it, we've got desserts and drinks down the pathway here. There's a reception outside. So thanks very much, and join me again in thanking all of our speakers.